So we're now on to the main event of this afternoon, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our speakers. We have Jack Ostrofsky, the Head of Quality and Design from Southern Housing Group, and Varun Soni, the Associate Head of BIM for Calford Seaden Limited Liability Partnership. Jack has a broad range of experience across the entire property lifecycle. He's been at the forefront of strategic enterprise-wide responses to the Hackett Review for several large housing associations, and is a founder and chair of the BIM for Housing Association project. Varun is a BIM manager at Calford Seaden, and throughout Varun's academic and professional career, he has built a solid grounding in architecture, design, construction, and the implementation for the use of BIM for design and construction projects. He's chair of the BIM for Housing Association's Asset and Development Working Group and a member of the UK BIM Alliance executive team. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand you over to our speakers for this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Duncan, and thank you for that really fantastic and interesting canter through the whole world of the community of BIM. And it's really an honor to be here as a member of the UK BIM Alliance and to try to, well, share with you what our experience has been and developing our toolkit and really going into a little bit more detail because we have, I think, a very engaged and educated audience when it comes to BIM. And before I get started with sharing my screen, Mr. Soni.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan, for the introduction. The only thing I would say is I'm vice chair at the moment now of BIM for HAs because we are developing a few new working groups which we'll go on to in the presentation. But thank you very much for having us here today. And really, the presentation that we're gonna bring over is going to be very much just a very informal chat, I guess is the best way to put it. But it will give you our thoughts and understanding of how we've actually developed the toolkit and how we perceive BIM and how we've been introducing it into HAs and Jack's experience as well at Southern.
Sure, and well, I think a nice little segue, a little place to tie this in is what Duncan presented earlier about the new BIM mandate in Annex 19, or Chapter 19 and Annex B. It had what is for a lot of people who are new to the UK BIM framework, it's a bit of an alphabet soup of acronyms. And here we have taken a little bit of an excerpt from some of the guidance that the Alliance is published on the framework. And this is probably familiar to a lot of people, OIRs, AIRs, EIRs, those sorts of things. And one of the places where we started evolving our approach to BIM was, a little bit was from my own experience as a specifier. I'm a building surveyor, I'm a technical manager, I write design and build contracts. And for example, if I was to put in BS 6229, I know that I'm going to have a roof that is going to have a fall to it at design stage at 1 to 40. And when it gets built, it's going to have a fall of 1 to 80. And if it isn't, then I have a contractual right in my contract to send people back to fix it. But if you were to drop in 19650 in your contract, you're not going to get exactly what you want because, if you look at these 6 boxes here, a lot of things need to be filled in. And that's where we started, I think, right from the top with the hierarchy of information requirements. And this is the UK BIM framework adapted to our sector. And won't go into a lot of detail on this. This is a very busy slide. The slides will be shared with everybody. You could get this from the toolkit if you wanted to download it, but really you have some flesh or some meat or the framework is filled in. And this was, to a certain degree, a sorting exercise. Now, anybody who's in construction and you drill down very quickly into the project information requirements, you're going to see some really familiar terminology. There's your build contract. There's your warranties, your change control plan, fire strategy. There's a lot more information that we could put into that PIR box, but fire strategies, and you'll see here throughout all of these boxes, this is your flow. This is your UK framework applied. Fire safety, the golden thread of building safety information is so prominent on the agenda for housing associations and really for anybody who's providing residential. This is one of the drivers for BIM. And before I move on to the next slide, Varun, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I remember when we went back to the start of BIM for HAs, one of the biggest things we were trying to hit on was that thought process of everybody believing that BIM was just about a model. And one of the biggest focuses that we've tried to have is the fact that it's about better information management throughout the life cycle of a project and of an asset. And that really for us starts on the organisation information requirements. So how we focus on this top down to actually understand the requirements. And one of the biggest areas that we started looking at really at the start was how we actually look at information requirements against information deliverables. So what are we actually asking for what are we actually delivering? And what you'll see when we go into the next few slides is actually how that's informed some of the documentation that we've actually created, because it wasn't just about focusing on the UK BIM framework, but it was about focusing on the needs of a housing association. So it's about getting both of those put together in a way that will actually be utilised on projects and for assets that will benefit a housing association. So that's all I'll put on this slide, and I'm sure you'll see what I mean over the next few slides.
Yeah, and just before I go on to the next one, a little bit of a comment on how the toolkit evolved and our approach to this, and I think it's probably very universal. Any housing association and probably any organization that is going to engage with BIM, from a client side, is in theory, and the right way to do it, the correct way. Actually, I should say not the right way. There is no right way, in my opinion. The correct way is to start with the organization information requirements. However, my organization and some of the other ones that I have worked for have 1,000 people working. So getting everybody to pull in one direction from the start when you're introducing something new like BIM, that's a big political challenge. And where we really started, though, was from the needs of a housing association. We got a lot of asset managers into the room, and we created some asset information requirements based on the mantra, well, we all think we're different, but we're all doing very, very similar things. We all run multi-use or residential portfolios, and our asset information requirements were, again, a very simple mantra. If you touch it throughout the course of the year, if you need to touch that thing in the building, it's probably important, like a boiler. Somebody's going to go out and do a CP12 boiler check. So that's a little bit of how we evolved this, but we've fleshed out all these boxes, as you can see. And what we wanted to talk about a little bit more was, well, how do we deploy this stuff? And here's the OIRs, and I did talk a little bit ahead of myself on that and where they do fit into this thing. So yeah, the theory is A, but practically it's Z. And it might be different for other people who are taking the toolkit off the shelf and they apply it. I'd really like to hear from people doing that. But in my organization, yeah, we're doing the project information requirements. And now, because we've gotten some traction with it, we were able to, approach our executive team and say, oh, well, let's look more broadly at this and let's talk about the organizational information requirements.
And just to add to that, the OIRs that we've actually developed, they're very much about describing how information is going to be required by an organisation, and it's very much about being at an organisation level. So it's focusing on use cases. It's focusing on hierarchy, who's actually pushing BIM. And again, when I say BIM, it's that information management sector and that side where it's not so much about the model and the focus on the model, but how we're actually focusing on processes more than anything else. And that really wasn't developed until, I think it was actually one of our last documents that we developed in our toolkit, if I'm honest with you. And it was very much, as Jack said, the first thing was actually trying to get a buy-in through a business case. So that was probably one of our first documents that we created. And although the theory states that this should be the first one and this will inform the PIR and the AIR, etc., it was actually something that was a last part of the puzzle for us. We always knew we had to do it, but it just had to come a bit later on whilst we got people on board.
Yeah, and it's when you look at it in a certain sense, it's a guide. It doesn't tell you what your OIRs are. That's a little bit unlike the AIRs. The AIRs that have been developed from the work within BIM for housing associations is really quite deployable. It's something that is we put it in contracts, of course, at Southern, and a lot of other organizations that have picked up the toolkit are using it too, because that is a really scrutinized, rationalized, tried and tested set of asset information requirements. And when I do say that we put it into the contract, when we started our work, PAS 1192 was really still kind of in effect. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. Having said that, or Varun, I think I might have cut across you. Go right ahead.
Yeah. What I was going to say is at that stage we used to put our EIRs in. What we've actually done with the toolkit and with Southern's EIRs is we've developed the EIRs in such a way that you don't need to have the EIRs present for a contractor or design team to look at, because we have all the level of information need in our EIRs. We have that developed to a point where they can actually take that information and know what they need to produce to help us provide our project information model, and then later on our asset information model. But the AIRs are very detailed, and what we've looked at is this is the appointing party basically saying this is what we're responsible for at the end asset, and we've tried to link it back not just to what we're maintaining but what we will need to maintain. So we have actually got sectors, we've got information about the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Bill as it is now within there, to say these are the sort of additional attributes and bits of information we are going to need to pick up going forward. Now that document can be built upon, and once that gets built upon, that will allow us to then develop even our EIRs even further.
And one of the things that we took pains to do is to really emphasize and clarify, again, it's not about the three-dimensional. I do spot a typo there, 3D dimensional models. 3D is, it's a little bit like saying pizza pie. Pizza means pie in Italian, but whatever. What we've attempted to really clarify is that your asset information requirements have really 3 broad categories. It's your graphics, it's your documents, and it's your data. And the HAD is referencing a data dictionary. And what we've also clarified is that really, when it comes to asset management in the residential sector, probably almost everywhere else, 3D models are not required to maintain your asset. They're useful to archive, but for your day-to-day, your month-to-month, and even your year-to-year, you're not going to be doing anything that will require a 3D model. That's probably set to change a little bit with the building safety cases and the requirement under the golden thread for you to understand your building. But again, that is really useful for downgrading the prices that you get and the time and trouble that you need to go through to get what you need out of the process to maintain your asset. And here, what we have a little bit is, just a comment that what Varun has already explained is that now, under the new framework, your EIRs are derived from your AIRs. You, as a client, I'll say to any client, so that you need to go through the process to define your asset information requirements in a disciplined approach, but to put it into a contract to make BIM happen, it goes into your EIRs.
And yeah, I mean, what I'll add to that is the process that we went through when it came to the AIRs. We had a lot of HAs around the table, and Jack, I'm sure you'll remember this, but we asked every HA to provide us with the current asset types that they actually pick up information for, the formats in which they pick this information up for, and the attributes that they pick up information for each type. And from that, we were actually able to see that although different HAs will call certain things different names, they're actually collating quite a lot of the same information at times. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain HAs that will pick up more or less, and that's absolutely fine. But that's how we actually started developing these AIRs. It gave us a good understanding of what are all the things that every HA is picking up. And that's how we actually started looking at this, because the focus very much was on health and safety, and very much on fire safety and understanding the systems that they have in play right now. So where Jack's picked up on the fact that it doesn't have to be that 3D representation, it's not to say that we weren't saying use 3D in the future, etc. What we're saying is to manage your asset, you will not need to use the 3D elements. And that's the sort of things that we've actually put into the AIRs so that people can be aware of the formats that are going to be needed, and also the people responsible for it in some respects, because it's a case of where we've got this information, we've also gave some explanatory notes on how you actually go into your own organization and actually pick up this information, find out who's responsible, find out who's actually providing this information, how they want it provided. So although it's a document that you can pretty much use from day one, you still need to do a little bit of work to tailor it to your own organization before you use it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit more of a comment on, the process of we went through to create these AIRs was a lot of painstaking granular work where 13, 14 different housing associations, and this is a little bit of a distinction that I'd like to make between what we do in my sector and probably a lot of the other sectors, is that we do not have facilities managers. We have an asset management model. So there's nobody on site on a particular estate. There might be a concierge, but that's really exceptional. And we have a small amount of people that are handling, in many cases, vast portfolios. So we have asset management systems. We don't have CAFM. And that might be a little bit of a tangent sometimes, but I do think that an important thing that I'd always clarify to people who approach me with software. That being as it may, we basically had 13 or 14 different lists that we cross-referenced and went back and forth. And some organizations had boiler, gas. Some people had gas boilers. Some people had biomass boilers, et cetera, et cetera. And we whittled that down into a set that, yeah, it's very deployable, but anybody who's picking this up, they should go back and look at what's important to them. Because some organizations have, for example, a higher proportion of extra care. Some of them have commercial units. Some of them handle their offices off of their asset management system. So, I guess that's a little bit of a caveat emptor. Don't use this in anger unless you know what you're doing. So before we spend the whole time talking about the AIRs, here we have the project information model and the asset information model. So there's, in reality, when it comes what's been the housing association experience at this stage of deploying BIM amongst some early adopters is that we have project information models, and then we have what is technically an asset information model, but the parts of at least my organization and the peers that I speak to, they don't recognize it as an asset information model. They look at it as a jumble of different systems that usually don't talk to each other. So, if you take a good look at that PIM, that box down there, if you're in the business, then you're going to recognize almost everything that's in there. Basically your REBA stage handover, your as-built drawings, contracts, collateral, certificates, O&M manual. Okay, the golden thread of building safety information, that might be a little bit new, but then it's a responsibility matrix of competency. Basically, that's a list of people who worked on your job. 8644, that's new. We could probably spend another hour talking about that. We're going to move past that. Housing asset data dictionary, but it's COBE, and then the key data set, that's clarifying into exactly what that is. Government's defining that. It's basically all the outputs from your big development job, and then that goes into your asset information model, which could be a whole host of different things in different processes depending on the organization. And that's where there's a huge amount of variety within the housing association sector and how people get that information, how they digest it, how they ingest it. And one of the most exciting things that we're doing now, I guess with my nerdy BIM hat on, I think it's really exciting, is that we've taken some really interesting work that is carried out by the Center for Digital Britain and the Cambridge University, where they've taken this project information model to paradigm how their asset information model should look like and what should work. So we're embarking in my organization on transforming how we manage information internally. And what we're doing is that we're starting from a data-led approach, looking at IFC, looking at some other recognized standards to change the way that we handle information, because we are very confident that that's going to help us discharge our duties under the new building safety regime. Because you have to understand your building and you want to be able to say when particular safety related items have been touched, as in they've been checked, they've been certified, they've been maintained. Who was the last person to repair that fire damper or that automatic opening vent? So, this is how we're applying the BIM framework. And I could see, Varun, you're chomping at the bit to add to that. So after you, Mr. Soni.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is when we started looking at the AIM, and what we were looking at is how it compiles with the information necessary to support asset management. If we take Southern Housing as a prime example, that's where that data-led approach has come from. And I think one of the biggest things to look at is we've not been very specific on whether it needs to be a 3D or a 2D graphical set of information, or what information needs to be non-graphical information. What we've done is we've said that there is going to be a series of graphical data and documentation and metadata that will fall with that. And it's about how that information will all relate together to be able to manage a portfolio of your assets. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we try to take away from this. We've not tried to focus on what the 3D model will do in the asset side. What we've actually tried to do is be realistic about how do we manage an asset right now for this given time, not what we're going to do in 5 years, 10 years, but how do we get better information management right now, and then from that how we can then develop going forward. And I think one of the things that we picked up on is that information management process. So being able to establish and maintain the integrity of our data through a full asset life cycle is one of the biggest things we focused on when we looked at our aim, because getting that right is going to be critical for up and coming legislation like the building safety. Also, if we're doing all this hard work during earlier stages of a project, it just makes sense to want to be more efficient and have better information. So getting those processes in place has been really important. And often we've also got to think about, when you're looking at an aim, who are the people that are going to be keeping this information up to date? A lot of these people are going to be data managers, data administrators, data technicians. They're going to be responsible for being able to accept that the information that's coming into an aim is actually going to get shared, and how it's going to be shared. So one of the things we looked at with Southern is how do we bring our information from the PIM side in the common data environment into our asset side, and how does that get broken between project to asset? And these are the sort of things that we've been focusing on when we've been looking at our PIMs and our aims. And yeah, it's been a really interesting experience when we've been talking to HAs about this. And the journey that Southern are on is not too dissimilar to what other HAs are on. And that's kind of why we started doing the work we're doing in our BIM for HAs second edition, I suppose, on focusing on the aim.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I think, very fair to say, is the way I've described it internally in trying to make it a little punchy, succinct way, is that we've sent all of these airplanes. These are our BIM projects, and they're dropping these parachutes, these boxes of information, and there's nobody there to catch it and open up and sort out the information that's coming down from the sky right now. And we need to be able to do that. And, I think a really quick comment on, okay, the slides and what's in the toolkit now is that you see all this red text and things that are highlighted. Those are things that are already, that we know that we need to update in the next iteration of the toolkit. And I was going to put in a new version of this, and our communications expert said, not yet, because this is what's already out there in the public realm. But I think that's a taster. It's a hint. There's more to come. But we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details of how we're deploying some other aspects of the toolkit. And there we go. So what you see here is an adaptation of, it's maybe a reverse engineer piece of work from the scopes of services. I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, but as you engage with the toolkit, if you have the time, and we hope that you do, this is your BIM activities for a housing association. It's probably applicable for any sort of serial client. And then what will you do to start to use BIM at an organizational level, and then how you would deploy it into a project level. And of course, we've got some drop lines on this to show where, you know, the building safety gateways exist. And you know, Southern and a lot of other organizations, we're simulating the legislation as if it does exist now and putting our supply chain through the hoops. And I am very pleased to say that every contractor that we've spoken with is really on board with this, or everybody that we're in contract with. People really want to get this right. And one of the, I guess, outputs, a quick comment from the Building Regulations Advisory Committee is the regulations are coming, but the risks are already here. So we're trying to deal with these things now. This is in the business case, and then there's a separate standalone within the toolkit for you to have a good look at, because, you know, there's just too much information on this slide for anybody, I think, to drill down into. But Varun, go ahead. I think if you've got anything to add.
I'll wait until the next couple of slides, because we're going to go into more detail on this. So yeah, we'll talk about it in there.
Sure. So, you know, what we have here is the first two columns from that implementation plan. And these are roughly equal to stages 0 and 1 in the way that it's set out, but actually they have very little relation with the REBA plan of works, or as I've been corrected, REBA didn't invent that plan of works. It was a construction industry council, if I'm not mistaken, but that's a little bit of trivia, and that's irrelevant to this, because what this sets out here are the steps that an organization should take to make you BIM capable. And, you know, define the organization's BIM strategy. You know, analyze your existing information management, how you're approaching, how you manage information within your organization. So this is kind of like saying, this is you going through the process of doing your OIRs. And my experience has been, well, I haven't gone through the whole official or the correct way, but in order for me to get my department ready for BIM, I looked at some of these, I carried out these activities. And then there's other things like get your documentation suite together. Basically, get a set of EIRs and AIRs. That's what you need to be able to start to use BIM. Really interesting topic. We could spend a whole time, another hour, talking about common data environment. Still a big challenge for us all, but that's not what we're here for. And one of the most important activities, I think, would be to, you know, get your BIM champion, or if you are your BIM champion, is develop your business plan and get it approved by senior management, because you can't do this. We can't. I mean, you know, by all means, give it a try if you don't have that support and insert it into a project if you're a project manager. But really, to make BIM successful, you need to have the whole team on side. You need to be able to, you know, have an integrated approach, because I think, you know, this audience fully understands that BIM is a broad base of activities across functions. So, Varun, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is very much the strategic part of the journey when it comes to a project. It's about being able to define exactly what we want, why we want it, and how we're going to deliver it. So as Jack's already said, the core documents need to be in there, and we need to be able to show exactly what we're going to be delivering and when we're going to be delivering it. Jack, your screen.
Yeah, I was moving it to where it should be, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, don't worry, mate. I thought you were going to put a picture up of a hot dog, so I was getting a bit worried. But yeah,
it would have been a taco.
But what I would say on this is it's very much about the communications internally at this stage. It's very much about, as Jack said, getting people on board. But it's also about being able to answer the questions before the questions come from the rest of the team during the project. Because what we find on a lot of our projects, and I work very closely with Jack, what we have found is being able to answer these questions before they're even asked allows us to be in a position where we can say, here you go, we've already created the information requirements. This is what you need to deliver. This is how we want it delivered. The reason behind why we want it delivered is so that we can use it in this asset system at this time, and we want it at this stage because this is what we're going to need to submit for planning. And that's what we need to get focused on. So it is a very strategic level at these stages.
Mm. Yeah, it's about making yourself BIM capable and BIM confident. Might be a good summary for that. Next, please. There we go. So after you got your toolkit ready, you got your guns in your holster, then you can go into battle. And sometimes it is like that with contractors because they don't want to do something that they see as extra. So you do want to have it early on, and really where BIM has been much more fun to use, and that's where you get the full benefits, is within housing. We call it a land-led approach, where we own the land, we're instructing the design team, and we're in control, and we're inserting these particular clauses into the designer appointments. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that, but here is, obviously at REBA stage 2, where you're doing your project strategies. That's where you want to deploy your information management function. And what we've decided and what we recommend, and in the feedback from the project managers that I work with, that having a common data environment has been really, really useful for finding everything. Okay, so it's just really practical, but it's also been really useful tool for monitoring designer performance. So, some member of the project team, they're late uploading something. It's there for everybody to see. So there's no more of the architect saying MEP's late or vice versa or whatever. It's right there. And then that keeps you on your schedule to getting your planning permission submitted. And so that there's my sort of mention of using BIM to manage performance. And here I think it's a little bit of a comment on what Gateway 1 is. It exists now. It's been implemented under planning law. That's easy. The hurdle's low. But if you think that the rest of the gateways are going to be like this, you're very sorrowfully mistaken, I can tell you now. And I think everybody's got a pretty good grasp of that, and they're anticipating that. Just a little comment on what we're using for Gateway 1 is that we're actually increasing our requirements. So we're getting a little bit more, we're drawing more design forward when it comes to what, for example, fire design code. And that's going, we want to have that clarified at this stage of REBA, between REBA 2 and 3. But I don't want to talk about fire safety all the time. Varun, do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing on this. Yeah, I think you've covered that slide quite well. So I'll let you move on to the next one.
All right, thanks. And next, please. There we go. So stages 4 and 5. So this is where it gets, in any design and build situation. And that's how residential construction is carried out in this country, certainly by housing associations. That's by and large our preferred approach. And where you go to contract is somewhere between 3 and 4. And having clarity on what design has been completed and what is still outstanding has been so helpful for us getting tender returns back without provisional sums, and having a good understanding of when we're going to get a provisional sum, because certain things cannot be designed by a client's designers because it's contractor design portions or it's subcontractor design portion. and the contractor doesn't even know the details yet, and they're not going to know until they procure their subcontractor. Just me as a technical manager, I'm not going to tell a contractor how to execute a balcony detail on a high-rise building, because different contractors are going to have different approaches depending on their particular supply chain. But what this helps us do is understand, and when I say this, I mean BIM, and having a complete design other than the things you don't know. Basically, I think you're saying, what I'm trying to say is, we know what we don't know when we go to tender. Barry.
Yeah, just to add
Can
to
I
that,
just jump in? Apologies, gents, and give you your 5-minute warning, because you're in a great flow, but just to let you know of times. Thanks.
No problem. All right. Just a quick one on this is just to say that, one of the things that we'll show you in the going forward is the scope of services, and that's one of the key areas that really are pushed in that stage, which is this scope of services here, and that really labels out what the requirements are of a main contractor, of a lead designer during these stages. What's really important about this is when we start thinking about Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 as well, and how they're associated when it comes into the UK BIM framework and how we've planned it out, where you can actually start to see duty holder responsibilities that come into here. And we've been very prescriptive not to just focus on this is what we need delivered for what would typically be BIM, but we try to focus it on what are the needs of a housing association when it comes to scope of services, and what will they actually require from these appointed parties and lead appointed parties during this time.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important outcomes of all of our discussions when it came to developing the scope of services was that in a lot of ways our supply chain isn't ready for this. So it went from beyond. It started out, okay, how do I procure an information manager? What do I expect from them? And then what we put together several scopes of services that we gathered, 1192 and a bunch of different ones, and there was a whole host of tasks, and some of them were for the lead designer. And for the main contractor's BIM coordination function. For example, using this scopes of services, the BIM service matrix is an example of, I've got there, 3.09 lead designer, all of those activities, they've been put into my appointment documentation when I'm hiring an architect. And that is really important to be very clear on, that your supply chain they know what they need to do. They can put a price to it. Sometimes you have to discuss that price because they don't look at it, and sometimes we get inflated things back from our supply chain. But then when we speak to them, we say, actually, this is what we want. Look closely at the AIRs. I just want a bit of Kobe information. I had an architect that came to me and said, if I have to model the wall ties in your external wall, it's going to cost you £150,000 to do that. And I said, well, I don't need that. And who would? Use your head. And we give that clarification to people. But this is about procuring BIM. And since we're running low on time, what happens next? So what are we doing? Well, we're updating the toolkit. Already mentioned that. We're going to be developing a data dictionary, and what we're going to also have is we're calling them onboarding workshops, where we want to break down into detail, even a little bit more detail for practitioners within our sector to help them use the toolkit and to get their feedback on it, so we can use their experiences, their comments, to make the next iteration of the toolkit better. Duncan, are we on time?
You absolutely are. You've just nailed it back on time for me. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Do you want to leave that last slide up just so people can see where to go while we're doing the Q&A?
Sure.
And I've got 3 questions at the moment for you. So first one, the RIBA plan of works raised a wry smile from Jack. What would the Ostrofsky plan of works look like?
Well.
Now you're live on TV and you only got 3 minutes. No.
I tell you what, it reminds me of a quotation from Thomas Jefferson. and I use this all the time. So Thomas Jefferson said democracy is a terrible form of government, and it's just like the REBA plan of works. It's a terrible plan of works, but everything else is worse. So I think one of the sort of terms of reference within BIM for housing associations is that we use existing standards. You know, we're part of the UK BIM Alliance. We don't want to change anything that's already, you know, it might be not a perfectly round wheel. It might be a little bit of an octagon, might be a little bumpy, but it's good enough. And it's better if you use it like it's supposed to be done.
Okay,
so,
no, that's great. Thank you very much. Next one, question to both of you now. How would PIR, OIR, AIR, etc., as well as the PIM and AIM, etc., how would you relate the method statements for the construction project to those documents? How would you capture that? Where would you see that? When do they, I suppose, perhaps start to be required?
It's a good question. It goes back to that REBA plan of works. And then in that toolkit, we do say this is approximately when you deploy it, but the detail is in that scope of services. It's really precise on what tasks are to happen at what point of the supply chain. But I think really important point. So there's the signpost. Okay, look in detail that and that way. But what I do want to really underscore is that's guidance, and don't not use BIM because it says you should put in your instructions to your supply chain for your EARs at REBA 2 or 3. You can still do it, but it's going to be a lot harder, but not impossible. And I shouldn't say harder. You're not going to get the full benefits, and you have to be using, you have to have your expectations in proportion to when you're deploying it. Varun, you've got something to add to that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things really that we can add to that. Is what are you actually trying to achieve when you start talking about these documents? I think understanding what your actual end goal is very important when we start to think about where we're actually adding this into a method statement. You know, even if we're halfway through a project, even if and we are on some projects, you know, instructing BIM is not about, and I keep on saying this, it's not about a 3D model. It's about better information. So we can easily put certain processes in place that will allow us to capture better information whilst we're on site. And technically that is a delivery of better information management. So there are things that can be done. The scope of services is a great part to start looking at when you look in the toolkit. And also the slide that we showed before where it starts showing you the relationship between documents and how they inform one another. That's also a very good basis to look at, because that will allow you to understand how these documents will actually work and actually what you will actually need within the method statement to be referenced to.
Brilliant. I think just adding to that as well, if we think back to the digital news update slides, we've got some great work from the BIM for Health and Safety group on PIRs and advising clients of those sorts of questions to be asking. I think also, let's not forget, we have the Cdm regulations in place, which tell us a lot of things we need to do regulatory wise, and why not do some of that digitally? And then finally in all of that, again, this morning, the RIBA relaunched the new version of the digital plan of works for DFMA. And again, that talks about when you need to be making decisions. And if your method statement is actually for an offsite project, you need to have made that decision early doors that everybody's then doing that method going through. So lots of interesting things and lots of interesting resources available now. Anyway, on to our next question. Who is best positioned to be the information manager for new development projects?
Well, I think that is depending on how mature your organization is and how knowledgeable you are and your regular supply chain is. So we in the housing sector, we don't have the capabilities to be our own information managers from a client side. If we did, I think that would be the place to do it. So I think, you know, a question around that would be, you know, would it be the architect? And I think there's a conflict of interest there. because the architect is going to want to organize the files and the information and structure the data for the way that their office is set up. And I've seen that happen in action. And if you leave it to the contractor, the same thing. So it's the BIM, and this might be because I'm a client, but I think BIM is all about the client, because we're going to walk away with the asset. I work in development, but my focus is to hand over something to the rest of my organization that is, an information package that is useful and redeployable. They can access it and get all this rich information that we're creating in the development process. They can have it, because I think it's my job. It's the obligation of your development department. So, that's somebody from my asset management team might be on this call. So I'm trying to avoid getting lynched, because clients with it, or facilities manager and asset managers, and development people and project managers, cats and dogs, maybe not necessarily get along, but again, it needs to be either independent or client side. That's my response to that. I'm sure that Varun will say, well, information managers are the best because he's an information manager.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I work with Jack as a lot of that, but I'm actually not going to talk about our experience. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to reiterate what Jack's saying. I think one of the biggest focus needs to be very much on the client and the delivery of the information for the client. There is no point following BIM processes. There's no point following the UK BIM framework unless we're adhering to that. There can be many forms of an information manager on a project. There could be within the main contractor side, but client side there needs to be an IM, whether that's internal or whether that's an external person that's been appointed. That really is dependent on the actual client itself and what they need to do. What you do need to make sure though is that whoever is doing that role is actually capable to do that role. And that's one of the things I would probably push on the most. It's about being competent enough to do that role, because getting a good IM and having a good IM within your organization will allow that the information you bring in, it brings in that consistency of information for every project you're working on. And that's one of the biggest areas that a housing association will look at, is that consistency of information, not just better information, but consistently better information. And a good IM will allow you to achieve that.
And I would add to that, it might even be better to have consistently bad information. And what I mean is, you would probably, going back to an earlier stage of my career as a latent defect surveyor, and there would be something, an issue in the building, and I'd be looking for something very important, a contract document, a specification, a piece of information, and having to navigate a variety of different, basically project information models, if we're going to use BIM terminology, but an old package of O&M information, and then finding out that after thoroughly searching through everything, finding out that it's not there. I would rather have a structure of bad information that enabled me to go look in that file and it's empty, and I know it's not there, so I can stop looking. Yeah. So, that might be that is just my view on it, but what we really want is good structured information. We shouldn't be satisfied, and I think I'll just add something to that is I put this into a paper to one of our execs the other week, where I was talking about information management culture, and I talked about Pavlov's dogs. And everybody thinks that Pavlov, or when they think of Pavlov's dogs, that they salivated when they saw lab coats. They were conditioned to be fed when the laboratory technicians would come feed them. But actually what Pavlov also did is he locked the dogs in cages and ran an electrical current through the cage to shock the dogs. And then after a while of doing this, open up the cages, but the dogs were so accustomed to the pain that they stayed in the cages even after they were opened. And I think that's our attitude towards information management, is that basically we are conditioned to accept really poor quality information. And well, that's just, animal cruelty is disgusting. So let's just think about that, and let's just think about not accepting that anymore. And that's what BIM's about.
Okay, right. Thank you very much to Jack, to Varun. Really interesting presentation. Apologies, made you canter through it a little bit. Lots of great information there. Sue's been doing a great job on the chat to put on the links to the where the resources, where the toolkit is. I would thoroughly recommend go and look at that. Review the videos when we share them afterwards. You can press pause, you can look at things and look at the toolkit, and then get involved if you need to, or just see how you can apply it to your business.